Why don't we start, Ajay, do you want to start, each of you give a little brief intro overview of your journey into entrepreneurship, and then we'll launch into these very pressing and yes, please, cell phones need to be off. We're taping this, so the cell phones interfere with the transmission. So if you can please turn your phones off, that would be hugely helpful. So thank you. I have Nancy here to keep me honest. Ajay, you want to start?
Sure. My name is Ajay Prakash. I graduated from the GSB last year in June, and so my journey to entrepreneurship, I started prior to the GSB. I spent a few years in consulting, in sports, and then a couple years in private equity. And so I came to the GSB thinking I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial, and I used my summer between my first and second year to work at a startup called Bonobos, which was started by some GSB 07s. You guys have probably seen emails about it by now. Really enjoyed that. Came back my second year deciding I wanted to do something that was very entrepreneurial and focused on consumer products. Spent a lot of time meeting with different companies, thinking about different ideas on my own, and ended up at a company called Rebloom, which right now I'm the COO. I was employee number 2. The product launched in May, and we sell a 2.5-ounce natural sleep drink that's an alternative to things like Ambien, Tylenol PM, and NyQuil. And so I started in July and been there for 9 months.
Ilana?
So my name's Ilana Stern. I am the founder and CEO of Weddington Way, which is an online boutique for bridesmaid dresses. It's basically social shopping for bridal parties. I was a buyer for Bloomingdale's prior to the GSB and came in sort of knowing that I was passionate about the fashion industry and fascinated by a lot of the inefficiencies in the industry, but not sure yet what I wanted to do about it. Basically started working on the idea for Weddington Way the summer between my first and second year. A lot of actually time spent with Ajay. We shared an office at Bonobos for a couple of weeks during the summer, and I actually did something different than Ajay, which is spent part of the summer in consulting and part of the summer at Bonobos. Half my time at Bonobos was spent doing a project for them, and half of it was spent doing a project for myself. And basically just got going in the second year with Weddington Way, took advantage of the time at the GSB to do a massive amount of consumer research. Was really the most important thing for us to understand where the pain was coming from with brides in the process, and incorporated Weddington Way in May of my second year, got our first commitments from investors the week of graduation, and started full-time really the day after graduation.
So my name is Alex Salazar. I'm a GSB 09. My company is called Catasoft, and we are making application security software. So we're trying to make application security easy. And our project's based on an open source project that we also have called Apache Shiro. So we're very much in the enterprise software space. My background prior to the GSB was in enterprise sales for IBM, so I've always lived in enterprise software. While at the GSB, I was very busy.
Yes, he was.
I ran the e-club along with Dana, who's not here right now. And I also put together the e-conference, and it was a great time. My summer internship was in venture capital, also focused on enterprise software. And then I spent my second year fleshing out a thesis around cloud software. Tried to start a company based off that. That company ended up not working out, and then a few months later ended up finding this opportunity and started this company with a different partner, which took about 9 months after I graduated.
The first prescribed question we have is about what you didn't take advantage of while at the business school, but these 3 students, alums, I think we're particularly good about taking advantage of many things at the business school. So in addition to talking about what you wish you'd taken advantage of, I want you guys in particular to talk about what you did take advantage of, because they were really full-time residents in the CES. So we'll go the other way, Alex.
Yeah.
You talked about it a little bit. But.
So I took advantage of everything I could get my hands on. The CES was ground zero. I spent I think at least twice, 2 days a week, just at the CES.
Not just eating.
Not just eating. With Linda, with Nancy, and just using that as kind of my headquarters for all the work I was doing. I also really leveraged the network that the school has. I mean, when you're a student, you have access to everyone. Anyone and everyone will take your call. Anyone and everyone will give you time. Anyone and everyone will tell you information they shouldn't give you. And so I took advantage of that and built a fantastic network of people that have really, really helped, and some of which have financed our company. And I also participated in everything the Entrepreneurship Club had, which also gave me a very strong network of fellow classmates and alums who are also entrepreneurs, which has been probably one of the most important things in the first year, and just helping me stay sane is having people around me who are in the same boat.
Is there anything that you think you missed?
Yes, so the flip side to that equation was that I had no spare time while I was in school. And that actually, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, was difficult because I didn't have a lot of free time to really evaluate ideas in the capacity that I should have been evaluating them when I was in school. And I didn't have the opportunity to really just spend time working on concepts and testing them while a student. I had to actually wait until I graduated and then had spare time to go do that work. In hindsight, it would have been
working
a bit of a
wife.
mix with a working wife. Yeah.
Alana?
So I think we're probably all going to echo each other to a certain perspective, but essentially, for me, I think the most beneficial thing was really getting out there, talking to alums, talking to people connected with the community, investors, other entrepreneurs, and just getting a lot of feedback on the idea as it was evolving. There was sort of nothing more beneficial from just a testing the idea perspective, from a building confidence perspective, learning how to talk to other entrepreneurs, learning how to talk to investors, and really sort of getting the hang of how everything works.
Now, Alana, can you talk about how you either did or did not do that in the context of class as well?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. So I would say what I wish I had done more of actually is taking more entrepreneurial classes earlier. We had, when I was there, our first year was a little bit less flexible in terms of extra classes we could take beyond the core. But what I did get a massive amount out of, so I took 356 in my second year, and we developed a lot of what Weddington Way is through the 356 class. That was huge. I mean, just getting other students involved in the idea, seeing, like, learning how to excite a team, having to pitch every other week. It was just incredibly valuable. Formation of new ventures, MGE, I took MGE with Joel Peterson, another phenomenal class, and just a lot of the classes where it's just, you know, sort of throw away the cases and really dig into a real business idea, do role playing where you're really sort of stepping outside your comfort zone. I think, you know, a lot of entrepreneurship is doing things you don't know how to do every single day, and you have to, a lot of the entrepreneurial classes really helped me sort of step outside of my comfort zone and keep pushing myself to the next level so that I really sort of became conditioned and got totally used to it.
So what did you miss, or what do you wish you had done?
Yeah, so I mean, I think getting sort of, I think the biggest thing I didn't do is there was so much benefit in reaching out to the alumni network in my second year and just the network around Stanford. And I wish I had done more of that in my first year, so I guess this is a little bit more relevant for first years. Just start finding excuses to reach out to alums, you know, as early as you can, and just start figuring out how to engage people in conversation. It's really beneficial early on.
Jay?
Yeah, so things I did that were good, I think, started talking about classes. The 3 classes I took that are probably the most valuable for me right now are MGE, who I took with Grosbeck. I think when I took it, I thought it was like, okay, when I'm running a company 10 years from now, I'll use these things, but the lessons you learn they come up in everyday conversations with vendors, with hiring, with whatever, and so it's been super valuable. Touchy-feely is an amazing class, so I think everyone should try and take it if you're a first year and you still have a chance to sign up. And then 356 I took, which was just the startup class, and so I didn't have an idea that I wanted, but I knew I wanted to do consumer products, and so I worked with another guy on a sneaker idea and just, you know, was able to use that to leverage how I think about selling, how I think about customers, who I'd reach out to in the GSP network. Outside of that, the only thing I really did was my second year I started a speaker series through the CES, which was called the Consumer Products Founder Series, and it was probably more selfish than anything because I knew I wanted to be in consumer products, and I just used it to reach out to as many people from the GSP who had started cool companies, and I brought them in. I think we ended up bringing like 10 or 11 speakers in over a few months, so that was a really useful thing for me. I'm still in touch with a handful of them, and they've been advisors for me. Things that, you know, I don't really have many regrets from the GSP. I think I did a lot of things I wanted to do, and you know, it's one of those unique times where you can kind of learn whatever you want to learn and focus your time whatever you want to. If I did 2 things differently, one would be potentially just putting a stake in the ground earlier of what I wanted to do. I kind of came first year at the GSP, not sure if I was going to do a startup, go back to private equity, go back to sports, you know, do whatever, but then Second year, I started realizing I wanted to be in consumer products, and so I started putting the stake in the ground. And it was much easier to have conversations with alums, with fellow classmates, with whatever, in terms of just saying, this is where I want to go. And the other thing, which has nothing to do with startups or anything, is like I wish I would have just played more tennis, played more basketball, hung out more, because the second you get out, the second you're doing a startup, there's so much to do and so little time for anything else. So, take advantage of being here.
And I think Jay had a great point that, I mean, he said kind of jokingly, he started the Consumer Product Speaker Series selfishly, and it doesn't just hold at the GSB, it holds, I think, in general in the population. If you do something to kind of serve what your personal desires and needs are, you're going to serve a broader population as well. And it gives you an excuse to reach out to people and build those deep relationships, which become a great foundation for other things as well. So, and it doesn't just hold here at the business school, I think it holds in life in general. So what have been your biggest lessons that you've learned up to this point? Alana, you're in the middle, you're it.
I would say, there are a lot of different ways I could answer that, because I learn lessons every day. But, some of the takeaways I have so far, number one, follow your gut. For me, in everything I do, there's a point at which you just can't rationalize a decision anymore, and you just have to sort of let your instinct guide you in terms of, whether it's forming your team or building relationships with suppliers or partners, just stuff I do every day. It's really important to follow my gut, because ultimately we're moving pretty quickly, and I sort of have to just make sure I continue to push the business forward. Another thing that has been incredibly important is transparency, and this goes back to Ajay's point with touchy-feely. A lot of what I learned in touchy-feely I do use every day. Learning, just being really open and honest and communicative with everyone that I work with, and just really laying it out on the table has been absolutely paramount to just sort of building a strong team and accomplishing what we need to accomplish. So I would say those are sort of the two things that drive me every day.
I agree with that stuff. I'd sort of thought about this, and there are 4 things that I think are key lessons I've learned. One is my situation potentially a little different than these two, in the sense that there was a founder who had developed a product over a year and a half and then was bringing me on as his first hire. But in the sense, if you're thinking about doing a startup with a co-founder or whatever, one thing I was told before going into entrepreneurship was that it's like a marriage, and I didn't really believe that, but the reality is John, the founder of Rebloom, spends more time with me than his wife probably, and we get lunch every day together, we're in the office together every day together, and so one of the biggest lessons I learned is that underlying values are critical. Like, as long as you guys, we see the same way in terms of how we want to do business, how we want to build the company, that's really important, and we're in the process of recruiting right now. We're bringing on our 3rd employee today, actually, and hopefully a 4th one in the next month, and as we've gone through the process of meeting a lot of people, it's been very critical for us to decide whether that person fits our values and wants to grow the business in the way we do, and there's a lot of situations where your values are tested, so I think that's the biggest lesson I've taken away. Second is that startups are super volatile, so you better be ready for ups and downs every day. I mean, the way I like to say it is, it's ups and downs, but always moving forward. I mean, there's a punch in the stomach every day for some random reason, and you just got to be able to handle it and move forward and realize that, if you have a product you like or a company that you believe in, that you're going to move forward and figure out the right way to get things done. Another thing is that, if you're doing a startup, you should try and find a way to have balance in it. I mean, you're taking a giant pay cut, and you're taking the ability to control your schedule, so realize that nothing's really that urgent, and you should be able to find a balance, enjoying what you're doing, feeling happy and content, but also having a balance with non-startup related things. And then it was already alluded to, but the 4th thing was just that the GSB network is incredible. I came into Rebloom right when we were about to launch a fundraising process, and I will tell you that any GSB alum I emailed, whether they were at a seed fund or institutional fund, individual angel, whatever, every single one of them replied to me. And even the ones who didn't want to take a meeting and had nothing to do with consumer products were responsive and helpful. And if we look at the people that eventually invested, I'd say, the large majority of them are GSB alums or tied to the GSB somehow. And so I think the network is amazing, and something we should keep in mind.
So for me, the biggest lesson I've learned over the first year is that customer feedback, or feedback from the outside world, is is tricky. It's like dynamite. You can't create a company without it. You can't create a good product without it, but if you use it the wrong way, you'll blow your hands off. Part of that lesson was being really clear on what feedback you actually want from the people you meet with, because everyone will give you feedback. And so an example of that is never ask someone what they think of your product. Don't ask them that question. The question that matters is, will they buy it? And if they buy it, how will they use it? Because if you ask them what they think about it, they may tell you all the things that are wrong with it, or all the things that they think are awesome about it, and none of those may have any impact on whether or not they buy it. And so somebody may tell you, because they're trying to be helpful, that, you know, oh, here are all the critiques I have for your product, and they really are doing it from a good place, and you come out of that meeting thinking your product sucks, they don't want it. But then if you ask that same person, well, would you buy it based on what it currently is, they might say yes. And you need to know that. And so we've just, once we figured that out, we just stopped asking people what they thought of the product and just kept the question to, will you buy it? The other thing is you need to be careful who you ask for feedback from. So the benefit of the GSB is that you have an amazing network to talk to. That's really tricky because you might go meet with someone who is extraordinarily powerful, and you go meet with them and you get their feedback on your product, and that person tells you it doesn't make any sense, they don't think it's going to have a good market, they don't see how it's going to go to market, it's going to be too expensive, integration is going to be an issue. But when you actually sit back and think about it, they're not your customer, they've never been in your space, they've never done anything related to what you're starting, and so the feedback ended up being completely useless. Or vice versa, they may tell you it's completely awesome, but all those things still hold, so you get a false negative or a false positive. So when you meet with people, you need to be really clear on what their feedback actually should matter to you. So if it's someone who's really important, ask them a question that they know and have credibility in. So if they've been a VP of sales at some big company, ask them a question about how to go to market. Don't ask them about if your product's going to sell, because they're not going to know. If they're, you know, if it's Mark Zuckerberg, you know, don't ask him if he likes your product. Ask him how you would integrate to his sales platform or something like that. So those things were very hard lessons. But now that we've learned them, our feedback sessions and our customer meetings have become a lot more productive.
So give a little bit, Alex, to something that you thought was important that wasn't, but we'll start at the other end. Is there anything that you thought was particularly important that ended up not being so?
That I thought was particularly important that isn't?
Well, that's my worded question. Whatever you prepared for.
I would say I'm prepared. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say because I think I'm still learning every day. And, you know, for me to tell you that some class I took wasn't important, next week it might become super applicable. So for right now, I mean, I think it's one of those things where I'm moving forward, eyes wide open, always learning. I mean, I'm finding that certain classes have become applicable to certain things. Like I mentioned, MG and touchy-feely are sort of everyday things, but we've had to deal with negotiations where taking negotiations was helpful. And I have no doubt that some of the accounting stuff has
I mean, what about even things in your business? I mean, did you think raising money at a particular time was particularly important, or getting a particular customer?
I mean, raising money was important. I think for us, we've tried to stay pretty balanced with how we approach things, and you know, don't let things affect us too much. So fundraising, you know, we got it done in December. We'd like to get it done in October, November, but it didn't hold us back. It's sort of as long as you have cash in the bank and you feel like you can move forward, nothing's really stopping us. And so we've had delays and issues, but I don't think there's anything that's surprised us too much.
So I think you guys put too much weight on that.
I think, I don't know, I know sort of, I would say, you know, through the GSB and just through sort of training and everything like quant and finance, when you start a business, there can be a tendency to sort of want to model everything out to the last detail and make sure that you haven't missed anything. Two things I would say is, you know, understand your market opportunity, sort of understand your business model or what you think it's going to be. And, you know, you do want to make sure it's viable, but then move on, because you could sort of spend all day in Excel trying to make, you know, every assumption perfect, and the only way you can make an assumption perfect is to start running the business and have real data to plug in the model. Is, I would say, sort of one thing that was, I don't know, that I've seen, I guess, a lot of people sort of get caught up on, and I would say make sure not to. That's all for me.
For me, everything I learned in the first year strategy class. It just isn't important your first year. Strategy, like the best laid plans, you can think about competitive advantage and barriers to entry and supplier power and buyer power, and none of it matters because it's all going to change dramatically when you start talking to customers. And it's going to change every week until you actually hone in on what your business model really is going to be. And I think what we came to was you don't define that. All that stuff that you learn in strategy, you're evaluating these multi-billion-dollar companies and you're analyzing their strategy. But you don't get to pick that, really. I mean, there's really small parts you get to pick, but a lot of it's really a reflection of the market you're in. It's a reflection of the space you're in and the technology you've built. What I would say was most important in terms of strategy is make sure you're in a big market and make sure you're in a market that's growing. And if you're in those things and you have a product that people actually want to buy because you're solving a real problem, everything else doesn't matter in the first year, doesn't matter in the first few years. It'll matter if you become really big, but in the first few years, the only thing that matters is you have a big market, you have a growing market, and you have a product that people want to buy.
So what have been some big inflection points for you in your businesses?
Why don't you go?
We were debating on what that means before the panel started. So we were like, what
I didn't write
exactly
the
is an
questions.
inflection point? So I think the first one for me was in November of my second year. I pitched Weddington Way the first time in a September session class and just started propelling forward into sort of working on the idea. In November, I cold called a bunch of brands in New York and basically said, I'm the founder of this like amazing company and I'm gonna be in New York. Will they meet with me? They somehow agreed, got off the phone with these like 7 brands like in one day and booked a ticket to New York. And the next week went to New York and met with all these brands and got them to agree to sell to my non-existent company with a non-existent website. So that was step one, and that was really big because when our first customers, inflection point number 2, came to me in April saying basically they had heard that I was working on something with bridesmaid dresses, can I help them? I was able to say yes because I actually had product to sell to them, even though I didn't have a website yet. I would say number 3 was probably Benu, who's over there, Weddington Way's director of merchandising, agreeing to join this crazy venture, turning 1 into 2. So I was able to tell my investors that our team size had doubled, which was really exciting. And then we launched the beta of our website in November, and from there it's been moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Whether it's testing our first Facebook ads and realizing they're awesome for us, which is really exciting, or launching our first contest, which we did on Monday with a wedding planning site. It's just sort of, I guess I would say that what is an inflection point, that, one of the pieces of advice I've been given by a lot of different people is celebrate small victories at a startup because you have a lot of ups and downs, so you can have inflection points every day.
Any others?
With Rebloom, some of the stuff that might be more interesting would be prior to when I started. But I know there were a couple of inflection points when John was developing the product. There are a million, but a couple to point out was, he had raised a friends and family round, so he had some money in the bank and ended up agonizing over the decision to buy the URL rebloom.com and spent $5,000. It's one of those things where in hindsight, thank God we did, because it just makes a ton more sense growing the business. And another thing was he spent about 1/3 of his entire friends and family round on hiring a world-class packaging design company for the bottle and getting that all set up. And that was one thing I know he spent a ton of time debating, but one piece of feedback we've gotten from investors and potential advisors and all that sort of stuff is that the packaging looks great, and if you want to, in consumer products specifically, if you want to sell a premium product, you need to have something that looks good and it can look like something that's targeted to mass appeal. Inflection point since I've joined, the product launched about a month before I joined, and I would say that there's been a bunch of stages in terms of since I've started. The big thing for me when I came in was fundraising. So obviously, that was my major focus coming in, and once we closed the round, that was a big inflection point because we were talking about, well, we have X amount in the bank, what are we gonna do, what are we gonna do? Then all of a sudden we had a lot more in the bank, and it was like, okay, now we can actually think about building this company. The next inflection point is what we're sort of still in right now is the continue to build a foundation. We got a new order management system, we're recruiting, we moved to new office space, all that sort of stuff. Things to put an infrastructure in place so that you can actually support growth. And I think we're getting to the point where, we're reaching that end of that inflection point, and the next one is coming up now, which is the idea of sales milestones, and actually, we have revenue, but now it's like, how do we take this business to the next level? So I think, and that's over the course of 9 months, we've been through a million different inflection points, and those are 3 major ones that we've seen. So one thing you'll see with the startup is that the landscape shifts rapidly, depending on how you're moving.
Yeah, we've had inflection points every day. No, we've had 2 major inflection points. The first one was we bootstrapped for a long time because we wanted to be ready when we went to go raise some money, and that was a bad idea. So the inflection point for us was when we actually raised money. There's something psychological about actually having a salary and having other people's money to spend on the things you need to spend versus your own. And so the moment we had money in the bank and there were enough zeros in the checking account, everybody
After the one, not before the one.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone felt a lot more comfortable, and our productivity skyrocketed. And it was just psychological because nothing else really changed. Our burn rate didn't go up all that much, but there was a perceivable shift in the company's mentality. So I would urge you to raise money, no matter what it is, raise some amount of money at the beginning so that you feel like you have a cushion. The second inflection point for us was first customer contact. We had designed this great concept on paper. We hadn't yet programmed anything, but we had all these great PowerPoint slides that showed everything we were going to do, and it was fantastic. And then we started showing it to customers, and that was an amazing experience because you think you know everything, you know nothing until customers start telling you about their real pains, and that feedback loop. You cannot create a great company without it. So our company, just from a product perspective, took off once they started taking customer meetings, and we started doing that on a very, very regular basis, probably about 3 meetings a week.
How did you go about customer acquisition?
What do you define as customer acquisition?
How did you get your first customers, or how did you approach your first customers?
For them to actually pay you, or for to actually get feedback? Because those are 2 different things.
I think pay you is more important.
I'll leave it.
So, it's definitely, I would say, a work in progress, and it's probably, the first question I have to answer every time I meet with an investor. So I guess I'm probably used to talking about it, but, it's been word of mouth for us, and we're starting to pay for it as well. But early on, our first 2 customers that came in April, one was a GSB classmate who came up to me in the parking lot of, outside Littlefield, grabbed my hand and said, "I'm getting married in August. I don't know what to do about bridesmaid dresses. I heard you're doing something. Do you have a solution for me?" And I was like, actually. And it's sort of, since we launched the website, it's been a combination of like word of mouth and now playing around with cost per click. And, we're in a lucky position where with Facebook, for example, we can target women with status engaged. So there's a lot of interesting stuff we can play around with there. But we're definitely focusing mostly on online acquisition other than driving word of mouth.
So our model is a little different because we're B2B. Doing the consumer-oriented customer acquisition doesn't really make any sense. So for us, what's really worked for us is really just getting in through the network or through the relationships or in any way we can. We try and get introductions to the most senior executive we can at a company in our target demo. And that person will generally give us 15, 20 minutes because what we're doing makes sense to them and they need it. And then that person will route us to the appropriate person in the organization. And that's how not only do we get feedback, but we actually build relationships and get leads for sales.
So just from a consumer product standpoint, if you're interested in consumer products or e-commerce, customer acquisition is very tricky, and it's something you need to be ready to experiment and iterate on. I think the way we did it when it was launched in May, it was a lot of word of mouth, and through the course of May through, call it January, it was word of mouth and PR. So we were in like Daily Candy, Oprah Magazine, a few other places where people saw us and they came to our site. Now, right now, we're direct to consumer and we're only available on our website. And so it's really, at this point, you know, now that we have money, we're turning on the faucet for marketing spend, and customer acquisition is a big goal for 2011. But it's one where you're not going to unlock it day one. You just need to experiment and figure out, you know, what messaging works with customers, what's bringing to the site, what's making them convert. And I mean, there's a lot of experimentation. So, you know, I know companies like Bonobos, even they've been around for 2 or 3 years. They're doing great. They're still trying to figure it out. And so it's one of those things where you have to keep. I mean, it's one thing with startups in general. You iterate and experiment all the time on everything, and that's a huge one, especially in consumer products.
Did you employ a PR firm?
A PR firm? We did, yeah. So we used a PR firm starting in like July, probably, or June or July. Negotiated a rate, and one thing you can do, you'll find with a startup, you can negotiate a lot of rates with vendors as a startup, and so they gave us half off, and ended up using them. They, you know, one thing with Rebloom, I don't know how many of you know the history of Rebloom, probably none of you, but it used to be called, it was launched as Rebloom Beauty Sleep Drink, and the idea there was to get initial beachhead customer with women. Women tend to have more sleep issues, tend to be more willing to try new things. We've switched recently to natural. But the PR firm that we started working with was very good with beauty, and so we were able to get placed in things like Marie Claire, Oprah Magazine, things like that. And that was helpful, but I'll tell you, if you're doing an e-commerce business, customer acquisition is much more useful when you get online PR, like newsletters and emails, so people can just click right to your site.
Yeah.
How helpful was your work experience in starting up and you started entrepreneurship early?
So my work experience is directly relevant to what I do every day. I spent 4 years in enterprise sales, and understanding how large enterprises buy stuff is a very complex art. And so, having learned it, we don't waste time trying to figure that out. And we've heard from other people in a similar space that they're throwing themselves against the wall, trying to actually get any traction inside a large organization. And we're not dealing with that because we know what we're doing in that space. That being said, I think in hindsight, if I could go back and talk to myself coming out of undergrad, I probably would have tried to take the same job, but at an enterprise-focused startup, and tried to learn, or at least at some point had taken a job working for a startup, because there were things that, I worked at IBM, for example, there are things that I learned at IBM, or that I was used to at IBM, that just don't apply when you're an early stage startup, that we're now learning the hard way.
I'll give you 2 thoughts on that. One is just on my day-to-day and what I'm able to do at Rebloom. I mean, I think I did consulting, private equity. I think it was really valuable training just in terms of thinking about business judgment, thinking about how to deal with different parties, how to build a team, how to build a culture. So all that stuff is very valuable, and that plus stuff I learned at the GSB. I will tell you, when I was talking to consumer product companies and doing recruiting coming out of the GSB, no one cared about the fact that I was at Bain. I did a place called Berkshire Partners, and both decent places. And everyone cared about Bonobos because that was much more applicable, just because there's a startup and that. So in hindsight, I don't know what the right answer is for me. In hindsight, I mean, I'm very happy with the training I got, but potentially having more. Had I known earlier I want to do consumer products or startups, having more of that on my resume would have been more helpful. But I mean, I think it sort of depends on how sure you are in terms of where you want to go.
Yeah.
How did you think about where you wanted to live after school? You ended up in the Bay Area. Was it partially because Silicon Valley is so close and Stanford's nearby?
This is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart, as Linda can attest. I'm originally from Miami, Florida, and when I was in school, all I wanted to do was go back there and start my company there. Regardless of what city you're in, the one thing that I found was that different cities have a network effect. If you want to start a technology company and you don't do it here, it's going to be very, very difficult. The talent's here, the money's here. Heck, half the customers who'll even really talk to a startup to work with are here. If you're in consumer tech, the people who are most comfortable adopting a new technology are also here. And so, it's very difficult to start something outside of a city where it's not their focus. And I mean, the same goes true for LA. If you want to do media, probably should be down there. Want to do finance, New York's a good place. So those competitive advantages for the individual cities, something that, as I tried to move to Miami, I started to run into in a very, very real way. And so I had to actually decide to stay here because of all those advantages.
And he hates it here.
I love it here. No, I do. I live in Pacific. I live on the beach. It's fantastic. So I get a little slice of Miami. It's a little colder though, but it's nice. No, I do quite love it here.
Yeah, I probably have a slightly different perspective. I think Weddington Way probably is a bit more flexible in terms of location. We could be in New York, for example, where the fashion industry is, or there are different places we could be. I think the choice to be in San Francisco and I guess we decided that San Francisco really makes sense for us. Part of it is I was here at the GSB for 2 years, and the entire network I built around while I was building this business is in the Valley. Any question that I have is a coffee away, and that makes things a lot easier. As we have inbound interest from investors, I can grab a coffee here and there with investors who are interested in Weddington Way and get to know them and build a relationship with them before I'm raising my next round of financing. So that just makes sort of everything a lot more like natural and easier for us on that front. And then in terms of talent recruitment, I do think it's valuable being in a location where there are a lot of people who are interested in working at startups and understand the trade-offs between cash and equity, and it's a part of the lifeblood here that isn't necessarily the case in other places.
We have another 2010 grad camped out in our office who is starting a company, and he's very deliberately moving back to Pittsburgh. But he's getting his company up and going and funded here and hoping to port it back to Pittsburgh. So hopefully he can do it, but.
I'll give you a completely different perspective. I chose my location, it had nothing to do with professional stuff. It was more just like, prior to the GSB, I had taken the best opportunity, and I was in Boston and New York for a while. And I think the GSB was very good at getting me to think about what was going to make me happy and content. And I'm a very instinct-driven person, and my instinct was pointing me towards San Francisco. Strong enough to the point where I turned down 3 offers in New York and signed a lease in San Francisco without a job the same week. And that was 2 weeks after graduation. So I mean, for me, it was just like, this felt like the right city, and I figured everything else would fall into place. So I mean, I think all the stuff that these guys said was true, and it's turned out to be great, but it was much more just instinct-driven.
Yeah.
How did you guys prep for those sort of first cold calls that you did, either with investors or with companies that you thought might have interest? Did you talk to people? Did you just kind of build PowerPoint presentations, like the actual nitty-gritty of it?
So I just did what I did for 4.5 years. I don't do cold calls. I deliberately try and get someone to introduce me to somebody else because it changes everything when you do it that way. But there were times when we had to do a cold call. In fact, one of the customers that we work with on a regular basis, I cold emailed the CIO of a Fortune 100 company, and he responded, and we had a meeting. That was very tricky. The first line was, "I'm a GSB grad," and that helps a lot. They will take a meeting. So that's how I start the meetings, and that's how I get the meetings, if you will. I try and work through someone, and that's the most effective way if you can do it. LinkedIn's a fantastic way to go about that, so you can see who knows somebody else. And then if it really comes down to a cold email, you really want to just make yourself seem credible in the first line and be really clear with them exactly what you want. And if you're trying to get feedback, you should be very clear that you are just trying to get feedback and not trying to sell them a product. If you are trying to sell them a product, be clear in that. Because people, if you're kind of vague, they don't want to deal with it. In terms of the meeting, I always have PowerPoints. All my meetings are on WebEx. And I keep my PowerPoints as clean and as simple as humanly possible. But at least for us, what we're doing is sufficiently complex where I need a diagram to just convey the concepts fast enough. We can get a lot of time. In terms of time, I limit everything to 20 minutes, 20-minute meetings. Anything past that, they start getting antsy. They may not take the meeting. And I tell them up front in the email, and I tell them up front in the actual meeting that it's going to be 20 minutes so that everybody's kind of cool. And then I just have a really clear idea of what I want out of the meeting. What are the questions? What are the 3 questions I need answered? If it's feedback, what are the 3 feedback questions? If I'm trying to sell them on being our partner or paying us for something, there are 3 questions that I want to get answered in that direction, and I try and get those answered, and everything else is gravy in the meeting. But that's how I handle it.
I mean, 2 things I would say. One is getting started, I don't think you need to deal with cold calls. You should have a strong enough network from the GSB and your friends here to get at least warm meetings and warm intros and with everyone you talk to, they're going to realize they like you, they like your idea, whatever, and they have people they can refer you to, and then you have this nice path of going down just warm referrals. I think cold calls are pretty difficult in general. And another thing, just to echo something Alex said, one thing someone told me before fundraising, which became very true, was if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. Because people, they're happy to give you feedback, and if they're really interested, then they might follow up. But the second you come to someone saying, hey, I'm raising money, I'm sure, do you want to invest? People just kind of turn away.
Alex, go ahead.
I come, I guess, from a slightly different perspective because I did mention the cold call thing. I actually initially had tried to use my network in the fashion industry to get to the brands that I wanted to meet with, and it was just taking too long because I was in ready-to-wear, and the wedding industry is a little bit different. So ultimately, I just decided this is taking too long. I'm just going to call them. And it's sort of knowing your audience. So I definitely didn't mention that I'm a business school student at Stanford. I'm a former buyer from Bloomingdale's starting this awesome company. So it was just really at the end of the day. And then it's like, when you're in that situation, like at least for that situation, I mean, you have to like act larger than life. And you have to make them think that, this is like the train that's like passing them by and they got to jump on, was sort of, I guess, my tactic, which can be a bit personal, but.
So I'll actually build on that. That's a great point. So when I was throwing the GSB, I'm a GSB grad in the first line, that was to get feedback, right? Because when you present yourself as you're a new grad, you're young, you're wet behind the ears, you're trying to get feedback, people open up and they'll tell you, and they'll give you feedback, they'll give you all the advice in the world. You can get a lot of data. When you are actually trying to get a business relationship off the ground and you really want to meet with them to actually try and build something, our first line is not that. Our first line is actually talking about our open source project and how successful that's going. So that we're legitimate, they know we're credible, we have a community behind us, we know what we're talking about.
Alex, I want to ask you a question because I think one of the most critical skills an entrepreneur can have is in sales, and you obviously had some great training in an organization that has some of the best sales training. What recommendations do you have for people who don't have 4 years at IBM and don't have that sales training? How can they figure out how to, as an entrepreneur, you're constantly selling.
Yeah, so I'll give you two things that I think are kind of my, I'll try and keep it quick.
As long as we don't tie his hands, he's in good shape.
There's a few things. The first is you need to understand how your customers buy. Your customers go through a buying process. And if you are not sensitive to their buying process and you're just trying to close a deal, not only are you not going to close a deal, you're going to piss them off. And they're not going to want to talk to you ever again. And so what that means is your customers go through a very simple buying process, which is, okay, well, what do I really need, right? What am I trying to accomplish? What are my initiatives, et cetera? And if you get to talk to them at that point, when they're trying to figure out what exactly it is that they're trying to buy, or you can help build a vision around what they actually need based on the feature sets that you've built. The second step in the process is once they kind of know what they need, then it's about, okay, well, what are my options? What are the things what are the different products I can buy or the solutions I can implement? And that's when you traditionally do the pitching. And then once you go through that process, then after they've seen everything and they've figured out if you are something that does make sense for what they need, then you go into closing mode. What everybody talks about is always be closing. That's the dumbest thing on the planet. I hate that phrase because customers don't react well to that. And then once you're in once you are in close mode, be really clear with your customer that you are in close mode and try and close the deal. I could probably go on for an hour on how you actually do that, but it's, when you're a startup, it's not that complicated. You say, hey, listen, can we close this? When can you buy? What do you need to make the purchase? And that's enough early on. The next thing is be brutal with your customers, or at least your customer management, in that, listen, if your customer's too small, or your customer doesn't have budget, or your customer's planning on buying it in like 18 months, stop talking to them. Just because it's this great brand doesn't mean you should waste all this time trying to get them to close with you if they don't have budget, they don't have time frame, you're talking to the wrong person, they don't really have a need. You're too busy. So once you realize that someone doesn't have budget, authority, needs, and time, or time frame, move on to the next deal. Otherwise, you're gonna waste your time. Second to last thing is start at the top. If you're selling to an organization, start as high as you possibly can start in the organization. I think for rookies in sales, it is too easy to convince yourself that, oh, I can get a meeting with this guy at the bottom, so I'm just going to do that because the senior person won't want to talk to me. And you start talking to that person. What happens in an organization, is that that low-level person might give you a lot of great feedback, but they will generally believe that they are the authority on the purchase, and they generally aren't. And once you build a relationship with them, they might feel that they should be owning the relationship with you. And if you try and get a meeting with someone in a different department or higher than them, they might feel like you're going over their head. And so you might have a political issue on your hands, which becomes a really big problem when your deal stalls. Now you can't talk to anyone else to try and save the deal. And so deals can drag on in this case. The worst case scenario is you might lose a deal and never even know you lost it because you're talking to the wrong person. If you meet at the top, that person's going to route you to the right person the moment he knows what you're selling. He's going to be like, oh, this is really interesting. I want to learn more about it. Bob's the guy who's in charge of this. And you meet with Bob, and you did it in one meeting. And now, because Bob's probably going to route you down one of his guys, you might write down one of his guys, you might end up at the bottom. But now, because you've built a relationship with everybody on the way down, if the deal stalls, you can work your way back up. And the last thing is, the most important thing a salesperson can do is not be social. It's not be like a fun person to hang out with. It's not even having a good pitch. Like, all that stuff's pretty commodity. Everyone knows that. The most important thing is being able to answer a customer objection. When a customer says, oh, I don't want your product because it's too expensive, you can't just go, okay. When customers tell you all the reasons they won't buy your product, what they're really doing is they're testing their understanding of what you're selling and whether or not they need it. So when they say, oh, it's too expensive, oh, it's too big, oh, it's too slow, whatever, you want to flesh that out. You want to understand where they're coming from. Well, why do you say it's too expensive? Well, maybe it's because they don't have budget. Maybe it's because they're comparing it to a different product. Maybe it's because they're comparing it to something that's completely irrelevant. You want to understand that stuff so that then you can formulate a response. Be like, well, I understand that you think it's too expensive, but if you consider the cost of building it yourself, which is what your alternative really is, this is actually half the price, you know? And so you can respond to a lot of customer objections, and if you do that, your sales will increase. And by the way, Harvard has a study that actually proved that that was the most effective thing for successful salespeople.
So there's your sales class. Other questions? Yeah.
What were your biggest obstacles? And when you get the team stall, how do you overcome
One of my questions.
those kind of obstacles?
I can start. We had a really big obstacle. We hit a bit of a roadblock. I want to say about 5 months ago. We were getting a lot of really high quality feedback. We were meeting with all our target customers, and we were just getting really high quality feedback. And based on that feedback, we realized that the product we were planning on building and taking to market had a business model flaw to it. And we agonized on what we were going to do, right? Because we saw this is not going to work the way it's currently architected and the way we're going to have to go to market. So we had to pivot the product. In the business school classes, they'll talk about how companies pivot. And they'll say that, well, all this feedback, you should pivot if you realize that the market...
It's all hindsight.
It's all hindsight on how you pivot. And you see these companies that pivoted and it all worked out beautifully. When you are pivoting, it is terrifying. It is the most difficult thing we've gone through. We weren't even sure we were going to survive the pivot. Because attached to that was when we raised money, we were optimistic when we raised money. And so we raised money based on the fact that, oh yeah, here's how things will play out. And when you pivot, you essentially take a few steps back, and they were good steps that had to be taken. But suddenly, your financing doesn't really line up with the roadmap anymore. So now now you're like, well, how do we actually finance ourselves through the process we now know we have to go through all over again with the new product? It was very, very difficult. So my only advice is, don't be scared to pivot because you're going to have to if you actually have a problem with your business model. And when you are raising your initial your initial round of capital, make sure you're raising enough to survive a pivot or two, because chances are you will go through one.
I mean, there's a lot of obstacles we face. I'm trying to think of a specific one that might be helpful for the question. I mean, one thing is when we were fundraising, we received a term sheet from a well-known seed fund in the area that was pretty onerous in terms of just a lot of terms that we would never want to sign. And so, as an obstacle, it was kind of like, well, here's a term sheet, here's fundraising, but signing something we don't feel good about, versus, well, we have some cash in the bank, why don't we keep fundraising, and there's a risk of losing this big round. And I think that's where I go back to one of the things I think I've found has been the most important is having your values in line. And so, like, John and I talked about it extensively, and we got to the point where we're like, you know what, we don't want to sign something we feel uncomfortable with, and so we'd rather, as long as the underlying confidence is there that we have a product that'll work and we have a business that we can build, we don't want to go forward with a term sheet that didn't make sense for us. And so we'd actually decided not to sign it, which was a big obstacle and a big decision, and we were comfortable with going out with our own term sheet and raising less or whatever. Another term sheet happened to come in, worked out great, but I mean, that was one where I just think there's any obstacles a test on your values. And so as long as, you and your co-founder or your employees, whoever, are in line and you're building a culture where people are sort of thinking along the same core values, I think that's really important. In terms of obstacles, challenges we face every day, I think one of the biggest ones is just trying to juggle a million things. There's no end in terms of things to do. And so one thing that I found very helpful recently, which goes back to the GSP, I never took a class with Joel Peterson, but a classmate of mine did, and told me about this 2x2 that he uses in terms of trying to prioritize things, where on one axis is not important, and on the top part it's not urgent. And so I have a whiteboard over my desk where now I have that, and like urgent and important, I'm going to take care of today. All the other stuff can wait, and that's helped us get through. I mean, one of the biggest challenges, which is just the fact that two people trying to do a million things is not easy. So.
Ajay drew that for me. We share an office, and it was 8 or 8:30 on a Wednesday night, and he dragged me out of the office after drawing me that 2x2. I guess so. It's a hard question to answer, I guess, because we are still a very early stage. So I think there are lots of challenges. I don't know what the biggest one is. One thing that we're going through right now is transitioning from super lean bootstrap mode to spending to grow, and just getting comfortable with growing our team, increasing our burn, and that's just something, a part of it is just that's where having a team composed of people who have faith in the business and really are passionate about the opportunity and what we're building, bringing in contractors, everyone we work with is really passionate about the opportunity, and that's a really important piece of, I guess just spending into growth for us, I think, because it's, you're constantly taking leaps of faith, and then I mean we have lots of little challenges. We went to New York at the end of January to meet with members of the media who had reached out to us who were interested in covering Weddington Way, to meet with suppliers. And while we were there, we had one of the meetings we were most excited about with someone really senior at a magazine. They canceled on us last minute, and it's just that's stuff that happens all the time, and you have to deal with it. And they ended up making an introduction for us to an editor in LA who's actually the editor we should be talking to anyway. And so it was trying to put everything in perspective and realize what would the goal of that meeting have been, and it would have been an introduction to that editor. So maybe we just saved ourselves an hour while in New York, and we can do something else at that time and focus on the fact that we now have this other contact. So it's just, I mean, there are big and little things, and it's just a matter of continuing to push forward, and you have to really believe in what you're doing, to whatever the obstacle is, to keep pushing forward. Otherwise you won't be able to get up in the morning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When you were bootstrapping, how did you determine what to give in order to incentivize people to come along with the plan?
As you are currently bootstrapping.
As I'm currently bootstrapping, yeah, I still am. So equity is really important. It's a really important thing. I mean, something that we've talked a lot about is that you have to be smart with equity and who you give it to, but generous when you find the right people, because you want the people joining you to be not employees but owners of the company with you. So that's been, I would say, number one, and that's other than that, it's, figuring out, I mean, we have conversations. Ajay was talking about negotiating with PR firms. I mean, we're in the process of hiring a PR firm right now. With contractors we've employed, we sort of always talk to them. It's very important for us that the people who work for us make sure that they're being compensated appropriately. So just having a really open conversation with everyone we work with about what we can and cannot afford, and making sure that we're partnering with people who are excited about what we're doing and sort of and buy in, and really, you know, we come to understandings. We don't want people to be doing work for us where they feel like we're sort of just completely undercompensating them because you're not going to get the best out of them. So really just having open communication with people you employ and making sure they're sort of on board with what you're doing.
Yeah.
At what stage did you seek legal advice? How did you go about identifying and securing? Are you still partners along the way? Are you doing project-based or individual-based, or do you have a partnership? Are they part of the growth of the business?
So, well, we have a law firm that we use in the Valley called Wilson Sonsini, which does a lot of financing. And so, when John was starting the company, we used them for incorporation and all the sort of documents you need to have up front. And basically, they agreed to defer expenses until we raised a round. And I think that's sort of standard for those law firms because they're pretty expensive, and we tend to use them only when we need to because hourly rates are pretty high. But they were very useful from incorporation, for trademark stuff, for financing, all that sort of stuff. Now that we have money and now that we're looking at milestones to kind of take us to the next level of growth, we're also exploring legal options from a consumer product standpoint. We sell an ingestible. There are certain issues that potentially come up in terms of terms and conditions, claims you make, all that sort of stuff. And so we're at the early stages of that. I mean, we haven't, I think the one thing we've learned is having a good lawyer is very helpful, especially getting a lot of documents done. We had one letter from another company that was, claimed that we had taken their trademark, which was wrong, but we had a very strong lawyer that sent them a letter that basically shut them up and, took a lot of work off our plate that we wouldn't have been able to do. So I think there's a lot of value there, and I think where we are, I don't know what to say going forward, but it's like we're trying to leverage as much advice as we can, and I don't think we'll have anyone on retainer per se, but just having good contacts will be helpful.
Did you use a separate attorney to negotiate with John to bring you on board?
I did not use an attorney at all. I mean, that was very much like, I liked him a lot. We got along. He gave me an offer that, to Ilana's point, he gave me an offer where I was excited to join the team, and he was excited to have me, and that was fair. I didn't see any need to use a lawyer.
If I can just quick comment on that. So one of our advisors gave us great advice on seeking legal advice that we took to heart, and I now see the wisdom in that advice. The first advice was wait as long as humanly possible before you engage a lawyer as an early stage startup. Until you actually have any kind of contract that you need to sign, don't engage with a lawyer because it's an expense and it's a distraction as well. Like, you will spend time with the lawyer, and even if it's just 3 hours, that's 3 hours you should be spending making sure you actually have a company. Because incorporating something that's never going to sell anything is irrelevant. So we waited as long as we possibly could until we were actually about to start talking to a customer and start doing some work for them, that we actually started incorporating so we could get the legal protection, because that's really what it's there for. There to give you legal protection. The second thing is, pick the best partner you can get at the law firm. And that will also be by referral. If you just call up Wilson Sonsini or just call up Fenwick and West and try and get somebody to help you, you might not get the best person. Work your network to try and get the best partner you can, because they're going to give you advice when you need it, specifically around fundraising, because they see more deals than venture capitalists see. And if they ask for equity, it's a small amount of equity. It is a drop in the bucket, compared to the advice you're going to get from these guys.
So I guess, I'll just answer that quickly. I guess I'm sort of probably in line with what Alex said, and maybe slightly counter. So the waiting as long as you can. I guess maybe I paid for like our first sort of orders on my personal credit card to our suppliers, and that was the point at which I realized I should probably be incorporating. So that might have been waiting as long as possible, but on the other hand, I would say just on the flip side, if you're looking to build something big, you want to make sure you're doing it right. So for me, like, my lawyers know where I stand, and I'm not going to be talking to them on the phone 2 hours a week. But when it's important, I'm going to involve them, and if it costs a little extra, fine, just because I'm trying to build something and don't want to screw it up, and they exist for a reason. So I think there's like a balancing act there of making sure you're being smart about building something scalable.
Just one follow up with you, did you have the team of Wilson Sun City help you guys with your funding as well?
Yeah, so in terms of fundraising?
Yeah.
So we didn't use them to actually meet investors and get to that point, but once we had a term sheet in place, we used them in terms of like our stock purchase agreement, all the agreements that we used to close. So, but then the lead investor also had a lawyer too, so there was trying to balance that out.
This is a fairly personal question, but how did you afford to live after coming out of like an MBA and starting up a company?
I took out a loan in May. I hadn't borrowed against 100% of my tuition. So I've been living off of a student loan at 3%, which is pretty cheap financing.
I did the same thing. I mean, I knew I was going to start a company out of school, so I borrowed all the student loans I could get, even though I didn't need them, and kept all my cash. I didn't pay for any school out of my savings. It was all 3% loans, which is practically free money. And also my wife works, which really, really, really helps.
One of my favorite quotes is from Josh Greenberg. Somebody asked him this question one time. He says, when you're a student, he says, look around. He says, for me, I looked for the cutest girl I could possibly find, made sure she had earning potential, and married her. You have to know Josh. He's hysterical.
She was our first VC, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have sort of follow-up question to this. What sort of amount of money are we talking about for bootstrapping, magnitude? How much did you need to bootstrap? Are it hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of dollars?
That totally depends on the
For your
business.
particular businesses? If you're uncomfortable saying that, it's fine too.
I've raised $300K so far. My commitments the week of graduation were $30K from classmates. So I built the website with $12,000.
And bootstrap can mean a bunch of different things, right? If you actually have money to do it, then you don't have to give out a convertible note or raise their friends and family around. But a lot of people just try and raise what they need right away just to get the foundation in place. I know John raised a couple $100K in friends and family and was very cost conscious in terms of, getting to a product launch, and then we obviously raised more, but it took him a long way.
We didn't pay ourselves for 4 months, and then raised a few $100,000.
Okay, guys, we have 10 minutes left. Can you impart your wisdom on the students here? What advice you would have for them? Maybe even glean from the good advice that you've gotten, what has resonated with you that you want to pass on to this next generation?
I guess I sort of spoke to it a little bit, but I think the best advice I could give is use your time at the GSB to take as many risks as possible. Even I was thinking about when Alex was answering the sales question. I mean, if you don't have sales, like part of it is strategy and part of it is gusto. And just use the time. I did in my second year, I gave a talk, as part of talk 10 for our class. And it's not just in business, but like taking personal risk, like push yourself outside your comfort zone. Get comfortable with that, whether you end up doing a startup or working at a large enterprise. Like the sort of being comfortable, sort of pushing yourself outside your comfort zone and taking risk. It's something you have the luxury of like 2 years at school to do in all sorts of different ways.
I mean, I'd have a bunch of things I could say that were helpful to me. I've probably said a few of them. I mean, one, find some of the underlying values to work with, and that's super critical. Two, for the GSB first years, especially, for anybody, regardless of where you want to go, I'd say take MGE and take Touchy-Feely. For people who want to do startups, do 356. And another thing that, from an academic standpoint, I take aligning startups with their markets, with Radcliffe and Barnett, sorry, and 4 Steps to the Epiphany was one of the books that they had us read, and that's one of the best books I've ever read on entrepreneurship and building a business in the right way using customer development. We've heard there's questions around obstacles and inflection points, and I think you have to realize it's not like a business school case where you look back and there's obvious obstacles and obvious inflection points. I mean, every single day, you've heard, we've all said it, but every single day there's some new challenge and some new inflection point, some new obstacle, and just like realize that if you believe in your product and you believe in your company, you'll get over those various roadblocks, and you just got to keep moving forward. And then 2 pieces of advice I got that I thought were extremely helpful for me when I was making decisions. One thing is that all great entrepreneurs, one thing they do is they mitigate risk, whether it's business decisions they make or whatever. And I think if you think about this in terms of your own career, a great way to mitigate risk is to go to the GSB. And so like, I think everyone here is in a good position to start a company because you've already, you know, if it doesn't work, so what? You have the GSB and whatever else you did before to fall back on. And for me, that was a huge deal. I actually don't feel that much stress, even though we have so, you know, a long way to go to make anything happen. And then the final thing is the idea of just doing it. And it's so cliche, but the reality is just like, one thing I found is that you're just so much more ready for this than you think you are. And I had enough excuses. You know, I was thinking about raising a search fund. I was thinking about doing startup stuff, talking to people from my private equity firm that I was at, talking to other people. Like, well, why don't I try and do this for a couple years? You know, one of the offers I turned down in New York was a big company that was ready to go, you know, get sold to, it just actually got sold to Amazon shortly after I didn't go. But I mean, I think, you know, my idea there was I'd go there, I'd get more credibility, and then I'd spin off on someone and start something. But the reality was, you know, I'm ready to do it now, why not just do it? I think that's 99% of it, of getting there, so that's my checklist.
Yeah. If you're a first-year student and you think you will at some point want to start a remotely tech-oriented company, you have to take the Andy Ratcliffe, Bill Barnett class. If you don't, you are throwing away your MBA.
And you pretty much have to round zero that one, right?
Yeah, you have to round zero that one. Yeah, so that is the best class and the most applicable class I took related to tech. And if you can't get into it or you decide to not take my advice, make sure you get the reading list and read all the books. 4 Steps to the Epiphany is the first book they read. There's another one called Crossing the Chasm. And there's another one called Innovator Solution, which also has a pairing book called Innovator's Dilemma. Both are good reads. So if you can't take a class, read the books. If you do take the class, and if you do not go to lunch with Andy Ratcliffe twice a week, like he offers, you are also wasting your money at the GSP. So strong words. I also echo touchy-feely. Touchy-feely is a thing we use every single day because it is hard to start a company. And those skills I use every single day when my partner and I are having problems.
And for those of you who are alums, that is available now through Lifelong Learning as well.
Yeah, so fantastic class. If also, I will say if you do have a tech bent, I love you, but I would not take 356. I do not recommend it. It is the process you go through does not lend itself properly to the process you will have to go through for a new tech concept. It's a too rigid and too linear of a process, and that's just not how tech companies are started.
Did you do?
Has it changed?
Well, they're revamping it. Did you do 273 over at the engineering school? Do you know anybody?
No.
Okay.
Fenwick did.
Okay.
Fenwick.
Yeah.
So I did 356 twice. So I really don't recommend it. And if you're a second year, or you will eventually be second year, or you're just not a GSB student, one advice that was given to me that I didn't fully appreciate when I was a student, and now I appreciate it, you don't have to start a company the moment you graduate, right? There's this pressure when you're here at Stanford, especially here at Stanford, that you have to start a company, of course, because there's Facebook down the street, and your friend just launched a social networking company that's being valued at like $9 billion, over like 2 weeks, and so you have to do the same thing. You don't, and if you give yourself the pressure that you have to start a company, you will make bad decisions, and you will pick a concept that maybe isn't a good market, maybe it's not, maybe it's super competitive. So don't give yourself that pressure. And now, if you do have a concept that you do want to start out of school, you will never be more ready than you are today. The concept of let me go work for a startup, like you just put, because I'm going to learn this that I need to know. No, trust me. You will learn enough on the job, and if it really is something that you need to know and you don't know, you can hire someone. So there's no need to wait if you do have something that's really compelling. And the last thing is your idea sucks, right? Accept it. It's not a secret. If you go talk to people, they're not going to steal your idea and go public tomorrow. It's not going to happen. So don't keep it a secret, because I promise you, whatever idea you have right now, it's wrong. It is completely wrong, and you're not going to know it until you actually start sharing it with people. So this whole stealth concept.
I totally agree. Absolutely agree. Only because there's 2 minutes left, and I have a chance to kind of lob in a couple pieces of advice, and I totally echo a lot of what these guys say. But I mean, if you're a student, you have a great opportunity to become an expert in something, and these guys alluded to it. I mean, Alex is right. People will tell you things they shouldn't be telling you when you're a student. I mean, absolutely, positively leverage the hell out of that and be calling people in becoming an expert in something, and Jay alluded to, kind of putting a stake in the ground in terms of where his interests are, people do a much better job responding to a specific request than to, I'm really trying to find a cool company to work with or start. That if you start with something, you're going to iterate your way to where it is you want to be. So even if it's an artificial constraint, and you can probably do 2 artificial constraints simultaneously, but there's a lot of value in really having something specific for folks to respond to. And Alex commented, you don't need to start a business right out of school. Anecdotally, the larger number of our alums who started businesses have done so 2 to 3 years out. Frequently, particularly if you're coming from a consulting or investment banking background, you haven't been in industry, you haven't seen where there's a really big need to find that big market, that growing market that Alex talks about. So if you get out in industry, you will find that bigger market. So there's certainly an argument for waiting a couple of years, and there's a good argument for doing it earlier rather than later. And one other thing I'll just lob out to you, Corey Ford's in the other room. I was kind of bummed his was the same time as mine. But he's launched this really cool program called the Runway Project, part of Innovation Endeavors. And I think he's going to come back spring quarter. But if those of you are thinking about wanting to do something entrepreneurial but aren't too sure what, I encourage you to look into the Runway Project. They're trying to use this Project Shed model of putting smart people in a room to find that big market, to find that big idea, and then develop the idea and launch it. So, I mean, it's an answer I would have to so many students who are in my office saying, I want to start something, but I don't know what. Corey Ford. It's called the Runway Project, part of Innovation Endeavors, which is funded by Eric Schmidt. And unfortunately, they're not taping his workshop, but you can take a look at his website. He just launched the first class in February. He's going to launch another one in August, but applications are due, I think, by April. But hopefully he'll be coming back spring quarter to talk. So, in any event, super. Well, thank you, and thank you for chatting with my friends.